Good morning, and thank you all for joining us for our latest episode of Reef in Focus. My name is Jess, and I will be your host today. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners on whose land we meet today, the Woolgoolga and the Bindal people, as well as the traditional owners along the Great Barrier Reef. We pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Joining me in the studio today is Reef Authority Chief Executive Officer, Josh Thomas. Good morning, Josh.
Good morning, Jess.
And Director of Reef Education and Engagement, Fred Nusafora.
Good morning, Jess. Good day, everyone.
Now, this is a jam-packed 30-minute episode, but we do encourage you to use the question and answer function within this platform. We'll do our best to get to a few questions throughout this episode and at the end as well. The episode is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel and website after today. Now, we here at the Reef Authority are the lead managers of the Great Barrier Reef. It is our privilege to protect and manage this global icon. It is a sea country home to more than 70 traditional owner groups whose connections to the marine park environment date back over 60,000 years. The Great Barrier Reef Marine Park stretches over 344,000 square kilometres. And Fred, as an ex-footballer, I often hear you say that's over 70 million football fields.
Yeah. Had a deadly step in my day too, off both feet.
Yeah. I bet you did. Now, Josh, one of the ways we manage and protect the marine park is by investing in technologies and programs that help build reef resilience. And that brings us to today's episode. So can you tell us a little bit about what are Crown-of-thorns Starfish and what's the program all about?
Of course. Look, and I thought I'd actually just start with a little bit of context. You know, our authority, we've been doing this for 40 years, managing the World Heritage Area of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park. And we do that in a number of different ways. We do it through regulation, strong rules and enforcement out on the reef. We do it through in-park actions with a whole range of rangers jointly run with the Queensland Government. And we educate people. We run a facility here in Townsville, Reef HQ Aquarium. We run lots of education programs through Queensland about the health of the reef, how people can contribute. And one of the best programs we've got is the Crown-of-thorns Starfish Program. We're out there regularly through our partners working to cull these coral-eating starfish. They're a native species. They've been around for time immemorial. But one of the things that we've sort of realised in recent times is they can reach plague proportions. So we've got a really sophisticated science-based approach, again, working in partnership with many others to keep these numbers suppressed so that we're keeping more of the reef alive for longer and increasing its chances of being resilient into the future. Just a wonderful program.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know recently the program has been increased in funding.
Absolutely. Look, we were really lucky earlier this year to have an announcement by the government that we're getting an extra $160 million for this program over the next 8 years. So not just a large uplift in budget, but a long-term confidence for the program too, because it does take time to make a difference in the marine environment. It does take time to strategize, to respond to pressures like the Crown-of-thorns starfish. And we've got that confidence now.
Yeah, that's so great. And Fred, what flow-on effects does that funding have for, the tourism industry, say?
It's critical for the tourism industry. A resilient Great Barrier Reef supports a resilient marine tourism industry, and they showcase that amazing place to the world. Millions of people coming to see it every year, and the industry itself worth billions to the Australian economy and employing tens of thousands of people. So that the control program is critical to supporting a good tourism industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Such a critical role they play in helping us to protect and manage the reef.
Yeah.
Now, we are going to be joined by some of our experts in this space to take a deeper dive into this area. So joining us today, we have Reef Authority Director of Reef Interventions, Dr. Roger Beeden. We have his colleague and Assistant Director of Reef Interventions, Dr. Dave Williamson, and a friend and partner from the Australian Institute of Marine Science, Dr. Mike Emslie. Good morning. Thank you all for joining us today.
Morning, Jess.
Couple of likely
Morning,
lads.
Jess. Welcome, everyone.
Room full of doctors, Fred. Now, Roger, we'll throw to you first. Josh has provided us with an overview of what
Morning, Jess.
Crown-of-thorns
Thank you.
starfish are. as well as a light touch on the program. But can you take us on a deep dive why these native species pose such a threat to the Great Barrier Reef and what causes an outbreak?
Sure, thanks, Jess. So crown-of-thorns starfish, they're sort of almost like the perfect coral predator, if you like. They're sort of science fact, not fiction. They're exquisitely evolved to take advantage of their prey, which is coral. Adult animals can grow up to about 75 centimetres, about the size of a dinner plate. They're covered in sort of 20 arms that are covered in spines that are packed with neurotoxins, and they can consume about half of their body weight or body size in coral every day. So even individual animals are impressive. They also produce 20 to 30 million eggs at a time, and their larvae can spread across large areas through the water column. And like their coral sort of prey, they're actually really, really well adapted to be able to take advantage of the natural connectivity, the water flow within the marine park, sort of the Finding Nemo Eastern Australian current, if you like, that enables their larvae to spread throughout the marine park. So the reason why we sort of titled today about the clone wars is because they've got kind of special powers, a bit like corals. They can actually clone themselves. So if you cut a starfish into parts, it will grow new starfish, and actually even their juveniles can clone themselves as well. So I think it's also important to note that that's the story of the sort of individual animals, but an outbreak is when the numbers of starfish exceed the ability of coral to grow and reproduce, and we start to see a major decline in coral cover as a result. And outbreaks can involve many thousands, even millions of starfish, and they're sort of like a marauding living carpet of starfish that move across the reef and pretty much mow down every bit of coral in their path. We've had sort of 4 major outbreaks that have been documented since the 1960s, and the current outbreak, each outbreak tends to take about 15 years to progress throughout the park. Started around about 2010, 2011, and it's currently the main sort of feeding front is concentrated in the Townsville Whitsunday region. So it's the outbreaks of the problem. They're a native species. We're not trying to eradicate them as a species. They have an important role. But what is critical is that we need to tip the balance in favour of their coral prey. And really, so outbreaks, we think they're a result of both the ability to take advantage of that connectivity I mentioned before, but also things like potentially poor water quality and particularly a major reductions in natural predators that actually feed upon juvenile starfish. We know that that's partly the case because we see a reduction in the frequency of outbreaks in the no-take green zones in the marine park. So really in a nutshell, I'd just say that the crown-of-thorns starfish, they're a critical pressure upon the reef, one of the big 3. And the consequence on coral is the coral that supports all the biodiversity that we value the reef for, and hence tackling starfish is a critical way of protecting biodiversity. Thanks, Jess.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. And, you know, September does mark Biodiversity Month, and the reef is full of it, and we're privileged to manage and look after it. But it is important, I think, what you said, Roger. They are a native species, but at outbreak proportions, they do pose a big threat to the reef. So, Fred, I know you do work closely with the tourism industry and in the education space. How have the tourism operators been involved in the program since it started?
Well, some may even argue that the Crown-of-thorns Starfish Control Program had its birthplace through and from the tourism industry. The marine tourism industry is on the water almost every day of the year, taking people out to the Great Barrier Reef, to their high value tourism sites. And they play a really important role in keeping an eye on the reef and ensuring we have great situational awareness of what's happening at their amazing sites that they're taking people to. And part of that is telling us when they see things like crown-of-thorns starfish starting to get into populations that are beyond the norm. So, you know, the tourism industry monitoring their high value tourism sites, they're like the early warning system in lots of respects for us, and letting us know when they see subtle changes starting to happen in their little patches. And then we have our amazing partners in our joint field management program and the COTS control program that sort of cover the entire reef in between the high value tourism sites. So, you know, the marine tourism industry play a really important role in both our situational awareness, but then also sharing that information with the world. Yeah. But, you know, things have changed a fair bit over the last year, and we always use the best available science to inform our management decisions. So I'm going to throw to probably two of my favourite doctors in the whole world, Dr. David Williamson and Dr. Mike Emslie from AIMS, to tell us a little bit more. But Dr. Dave, can you tell us a bit more about how monitoring and control has changed over the last decade?
Yeah, thanks, Fred. And yeah, the great background that you provided there on the importance of the tourism industry in terms of their eye on the reef. It's an incredibly important part of the program, and that reconnaissance that comes in from the tourism industry is highly valued by us. And you're right, is that the initial COTS control efforts were really focused on high value tourism sites, and they're places on the reef where we've got reef pontoons or we've got high use vessel anchorages. So they're places that there was a lot of effort went into suppressing COTS numbers in those places and protecting coral early on. And then over the last decade, we've seen some significant development in the program. Obviously, it's a lot better funded now, and it has capacity to do a lot more. But we've gone to the point where we're not just protecting coral at individual sites, we're actually scaling it up to individual reefs and clusters of reefs and potentially entire regions to actually suppress COTS to sustainable numbers and protect coral over vast areas. There's been a couple of big game changers really that have allowed us to do that. And one of them is a single shot injection technique, which was developed in about 2015 or so. And these days we're simply injecting these starfish once with either vinegar or ox bile salts, and that kills those starfish within hours. And within a day or two, that starfish is dissolving and it's being eaten by fish and other invertebrates on the reef. And what you're left with is a pile of inedible spines on the seafloor. So it's a very efficient way of culling the starfish. We've also got an integrated pest management system, which sort of gives us a very structured way in which we go about tackling outbreaks on any individual reefs. When we get to a reef, we initially survey the reef, we find out where the COTS are aggregated, and then we target the cull dives to the specific areas of the reef that where the COTS are located. And that way we can be much more efficient about the way we're moving through the reefs. The way we actually target which reefs to focus our efforts on, and that annual prioritization process that we go through to get that job done is a very in-depth and informed process that draws on multiple lines of evidence from the research community, from field operators, from the tourism industry, and also we run some elicitation workshops where we get everybody together and we talk about what's going on. And it's that collaborative and transparent process that's really enabled us to effectively deploy the COTS program fleet to the right reefs at the right times to make sure we're getting maximum benefit from the program. And just recently, the integrated pest management system that we use in the program was nominated for a Eureka Award. We weren't successful in winning the award, but we were nominated as finalists. And it's a great honour to be there in Sydney for those awards and for the program to be recognised in that way. And it really underpins the importance of the integration of science and research into the program. It really underpins everything that we do and enables us to really deploy these valuable resources to maximum effect and protect as much coral as possible.
Jess, can I just jump in there and just really, acknowledge the team's work there? That Eureka Prize you mentioned so casually there, David, it's a national science award, and yet, your team's been called out for the wonderful work you've done through time with the support of AIMS, of the Reef and Rainforest Research Centre, of the tourism industry over so many years. And, we often conceive of innovation as some shiny new thing on the horizon we need to, race towards, but actually, this program is an example of innovation in practice on a daily basis. You mentioned the single shot effort there that's radically improved the efficiency of the program. And I just think it's marvellous that those efforts have been recognised. So well done to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Josh, I think we all echo big congratulations to you and the team and, both past and present members of that team, and as well as the partners that we work alongside in this space. So, yeah.
Truly outstanding.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, I know,
Thanks.
Roger, you've touched on before how many days are spent at sea and how many dive hours that might equate to in this space. Can you share a little bit of that information with the audience for us?
Sure. So we're up at sort of between 250, 270, 75 days per annum out on the water. That's across the fleet of vessels. So each of those vessels is spending that kind of amount of time out at sea, which is an enormous amount of days. And you can imagine the operational logistics of that are significant. And then those vessels and the teams of divers there are actually conducting about 20 to 25,000 dive hours per year. And that's how we've got to the point that since the program really kicked off, there's been about 1.1 million starfish culled over that period of time. The critical bit, and spanning more than 330 reefs. The important bit, of course, being, as Dave said, it's the right starfish culled at the right time in the right place, which is really how you maximise the benefit of this particular work.
There's evolution in those divers, Roger. Like, have they started to evolve and have gills? So much time underwater.
I think many of the divers are actually ex or continuing spearfishers, and so they are very well adapted to hunting and looking for these prey, which are, when we're looking for starfish, they're pretty good at hiding. They're not always out in the open. They're cryptic, and so it's a pretty skilled job. They're not always out in the way that the ones are behind Dave there. So yeah, it's a really specialised job. It's really great to provide job opportunities that then often go on to working within the marine tourism industry, increasing opportunities for traditional owners to work on sea country. So yeah, they're very well adapted.
Yeah, good to hear. Now Dave, did touch on it, but Roger, could you explain, I know you've been doing some work in this space, even through dashboards and using that innovative technology we have available to, I guess, use the best available science to help our management. Can you just explain in a little more detail that total process of us prioritising reefs?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's a critical part to making the program efficient and effective. I mean, there's a dashboard up behind you guys there. So the key thing that we do each year, and we do it in partnership with people like Mike, but also the other partners, the Reef and Rainforest Research Centre, the Great Barrier Reef Foundation, Australian Institute of Marine Science, CSIRO, and many others. And really what we're doing is we look at what information do we have about current coral status, so coral cover on individual reefs, what information do we have about the status of crown-of-thorns starfish densities on individual reefs, about the connectivity patterns that I mentioned before, so how does water flow through the reef, and then also the effect of other pressures upon those reefs as well. So that combination of information gives us the sort of biological, ecological understanding of what's happening with the outbreak, that balance between coral and cots or crown-of-thorns starfish. But then we also look at the economic parameters. So some of the reefs are critically important, as Fred said, as being key places where the tourism industry go to. So we combine all of that sort of information alongside other, what's happening with other management actions like zoning, which protects particular reefs. And we bring all that information together to then identify which are the reefs that are in play in terms of the outbreak in an individual reef, in an individual year. So out of the 3,800 odd reefs, individual reefs that make up the Great Barrier Reef, we've identified about 500 that are really important in driving the outbreak cycle, mainly because they're very connected to other reefs. And then we look at, but not every one of those are in play in each individual year. So we look at the subset of those, the sort of 250 we have identified for this year that are actually in play at any one time. And what's up on that panel behind that the audience can hopefully see is really we can look at that data as a series of maps that help us to understand the outbreak status of an individual reef. So if it's green, it means there's low densities, either no or low densities of crown-of-thorns starfish, and we would expect coral growth to exceed losses from predation. And many of those reefs that are green there are green because, well, we've been there, and the Crown-of-thorns Starfish Program has held those COTS numbers in check. Now, so that's kind of the gist of it, how we bring together all that information, and it's a very collaborative process to then target the reefs each year. I mentioned our colleagues, and particularly the Australian Institute of Marine Science, because they've been looking at the long-term health and condition of the Great Barrier Reef since the 1985. I'd just like to throw over to our colleague Mike Emslie to provide some additional information upon the research that's going on the reef.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. It's really great to be here and continue the partnership with Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority. The Australian Institute of Marine Science has a number of avenues of research looking into crown-of-thorns starfish. We're looking into ways to reduce numbers through predation. So recently, a bit of emphasis was on the giant Triton snail, which is a fairly voracious predator of crown-of-thorns, but not only just using predation, but also maybe, I guess, one way of terming it is chemical warfare. So the giant Triton snail exudes chemicals, and AIM scientists are looking into whether, we can use those chemicals to herd basically the crown-of-thorns starfish into pens where the divers can then pick them off. Another avenue of research is eDNA, so environmental DNA, and this is basically an early warning sign that crown-of-thorns numbers are building up. It's a really quick, efficient way of getting that information. You simply take a water sample and then take it back to the lab and analyse that water sample to see if there's crown-of-thorns starfish DNA in that sample. We're trying to develop that to get more quantitative information to see if we can get numbers of starfish. But I guess from my perspective, I run the long-term monitoring program. It's a multi-decadal program looking at the status of the Great Barrier Reef. And one of the things we do, of course, is look for numbers of crown-of-thorns starfish. We released our annual status report a couple of months ago now, and what we've seen is increases in hard coral cover across the northern and central Great Barrier Reef, where previously crown-of-thorns starfish outbreaks were prevalent. And what we've seen is the number of outbreaks have decreased across those areas of the Great Barrier Reef. And I think that's due in no small part to the COTS control program. They're really out there making a difference and helping to keep the Great Barrier Reef great as we know it. I guess one little cause of concern is increasing numbers of crown-of-thorns starfish in the very far north of the marine park up around Cape Granville. So we'll be continuing to monitor into the future and assist the authority with the COTS control program.
Certainly is very fascinating. Every time I see that video, it's just so interesting.
Cool,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's good to see how much this program is evolving by sort of using that science and research. And you've both lightly touched on it, and Josh, you might like to add some information as well, but that's exactly right, Mike. Once you've kind of tackled one reef and then you're on to the next, and then are you suddenly back at one reef? Like, how do you determine the success of this program and how it is working so well?
Well, I think for me, it's seeing how well reefs do bounce back once the crown-of-thorns starfish have been, if not eradicated, then their numbers diminished. There's any number of metrics. You can look at the amount of hard coral cover, you can look at the recovery of it, but you can also look at the amount of outbreaking reefs and the progression of the wave of outbreaks. So we know in previous outbreaks that the wave of outbreaks moves north to south. Previously, we've seen the reefs in Cape Upstart would start outbreaking a couple of years after the ones off Townsville, but I don't think we've really seen that advancement happen yet. And this is really positive news and really great information that the culling that's been done around the reefs in Townsville looks like it may be having an effect, if not stopping the wave of outbreaks, and at least slowing it down.
And Roger, do you have anything to add to that as well?
Yes. So look, I'll just add to that. I mean, sure. Just to add to what Mike was saying, I mean, we use very similar methods to those used by AIMS, and so that we can actually use the combined data sets from both the Australian Institute of Marine Science and then from the COTS control program and from other sources such as on the reef as well. And really, we do look at those parameters that Mike mentioned. So hard coral cover, the crown-of-thorns starfish numbers themselves on key reefs, as I talked about before. And really, that's what's giving us these kind of insights into what's actually going on, the outbreak dynamics. As I say, one of the things that's actually enabled this time, as Mike mentioned, an increasing number of adult starfish in the far north, because we've got this really good reconnaissance going on. It happens really early. For the first time, we were able to mobilise additional resources at the back end of last year and deploy those into that region, one, to confirm and also to try and get on top of those outbreaks quickly. And that's particularly important because we think that when outbreaks get away in that area up between Cairns and Lizard Island, it can have major downstream consequences because of those connectivity dynamics. So we look at all the data in combination, and that helps us to keep a really good eye on what's going on the reef. And then we're very fortunate to have things like the Australian Institute of Marine Sciences long-term multi-decadal program, because that really gives us that line of truth of exactly what's actually happening out on the reef.
Just can I jump in there?
Yeah, of course.
So like the program itself, like outstanding with respect to monitoring and the process and you know, the scientific rigor behind it. But you know, the couple of 100,000 knocking on 1 million people that live along the GBR coast, how can they sort of get involved, support this program to ensure that it is as effective as it possibly can be? Dr. Dave, can you help us out with that, or any other?
Yeah, sure, Fred. Look, I think you alluded to it earlier, is that, you know, the value of reef stakeholders, reef users, tourism industry operators is their eyes on the water. Any information that comes in is incredibly valuable to us, and it can be submitted through the Eye on the Reef sightings app. So we have the Marine Park Authority has an app. You can find it on the App Store or through Google Play. Download it to your smart device, and you can actually report your sightings that way from wherever you are on the park. So if you've been out there and you've sighted an aggregation of Crown-of-thorns starfish, you can certainly submit those sightings and know that that data will actually come to us in the program, and it will help to inform our decision making on where the program fleet should be deployed at any particular time. So all of that information is considered, and when we start to get hotspots of sightings in certain areas of the park, we realise, well, that's a bit of a warning sign that something's going on there. We better send a Reef Joint Field Management Program vessel, or we better send a COTS vessel to go and investigate what's actually going on and deal with the problem. So yeah, just encourage everybody to have a look at the sightings app and submit your sightings.
Thanks, Dave.
And we do want people to be careful, though, don't we?
Yes.
That they are poisonous animals.
Yeah.
And there's a whole lot of resources on our website around how to engage safely with Crown-of-thorns starfish.
You don't want to be touching them.
No, that's right.
Thank you.
Steer clear. We are close to running out of time, but we have had one question coming through from the audience. Roger, is there any information regarding the effects of the La Nina weather patterns affecting currents that could change the typical larval distribution?
So yeah, there is information, and it's about the El Nino Southern Oscillation. So La Nina is one phase of that, El Nino is the other. And it does appear that one of the other factors that influences these main current patterns that move through the reef is the phase of ENSO. And perhaps that has a role in the mixing that happens of nutrients that might supply the Crown-of-thorns starfish larvae, particularly in that area where it's really important is up in that initiation area, where if outbreaks get away, that then it can mean that their larvae spread downstream. So yes, there is information, there's certainly science going on to look at how the confluence of current patterns, the big climate drivers on those, changes in temperature, all of those things are actually being looked at, so we better understand this problem.
Yeah, right. Thank you very much. Well, thank you to the expert panel for joining us today. We do appreciate your time and helping us go on that deeper dive into the Clone Wars there. In the studio, Roger, Dave, do you have anything else to add? Josh?
Josh's fine. Look, I think just to sum up, really quickly, Roger touched on this briefly earlier. Crown-of-thorns starfish is one of the big 3 threats to the Great Barrier Reef, and I think everyone wants a healthy Great Barrier Reef for the future. And what you're seeing here is an example of a program that's making a real difference every day, protecting corals, looking after the future of that reef and making sure it's more resilient for the future. It's a program that's heavily underpinned by fantastic world-leading science. The Triton biological response stuff, the surveillance we've got in hand, the single shot injection. These are all examples of science into management, which I just absolutely love and am excited about for the future. And just finally, to emphasise, the partnership matters. You know, this is a huge estate. The size of Italy, we're a relatively small government agency. We can't do this alone, and we're not. We've got fantastic support from tourism operators, the Reef and Rainforest Research Centre in Cairns doing wonderful work with traditional owner, First Nations people throughout the catchments, and of course our fantastic science agencies we're so fortunate to have here in Australia. Every dollar spent on the Great Barrier Reef needs to be spent wisely, and I know through this program it is. So well done to everyone involved.
And I know we work closely with the Great Barrier Reef Foundation as well in there, and have done for a long time. So you're right, Josh. It is a really powerful partnership, and it just proves that everyone has a role to play in helping us protect and manage this global icon. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. This episode, as I said, will be available on our website and YouTube channel, as well as a wealth of information on Crown-of-thorns Starfish. So jump on, check it out. We will send a survey out after today. We do really appreciate your feedback, and our next episode will be in November. So we look forward to seeing you all then, I guess. And until then, we hope you all can see the reef, love the reef, and protect the reef. Bye for now.
Hashtag love
Thanks,
the reef.
everyone.
See you all.